All right, folks, so welcome. Welcome to today's program brought to you by the U.S. Botanic Garden. My name is Grace Anderson. I'm an education specialist here. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that your microphones will be muted and your screens are blocked from sharing during the duration of this program. If you have any questions during the program, please use the chat tab, which is the pink tab in the bottom right-hand corner. So I'll be fielding your questions during this Q&A, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible. As a reminder, this program is being recorded and will eventually be posted on the USBG website for future viewing. Please note that the U.S. Botanic Garden is dedicated to providing a respectful, harassment-free experience. We seek to provide an environment in which diversity of people learn from and enjoy our programs in a safe and welcoming environment. The garden does not tolerate harassment in any form. Discriminatory or disruptive behavior is not appropriate. And by joining this program, you agree to abide by these principles. Those who violate these standards will be immediately removed from participation and may be referred to appropriate authorities as necessary. And now a bit about our program host. Stephen Jones is an arborist at the United States Botanic Garden. He cares for the Tropics Room as well as the Amorphophallus collection, which includes the garden's collection of corpse flowers. In addition to the collections he cares for, Stephen's interested in using the latest science and technology to better understand plants in order to maximize our ability to cultivate them. We're very excited to have him here today answering questions about the corpse flower, so please help me in welcoming Stephen Jones.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our garden court. Thanks for joining me today. Wish we could have you here in person, but this is the best we could do right now, so I hope I can answer all your questions and give you some good information. Just a little background. I'm lucky enough to care for our collection of Amorphophallus. The genus itself, we have a number of species within the genus, and obviously these are the big showstoppers. So the majority of our collection is kept over at our production facility, and within that collection in the greenhouse, we have about 13 of these individuals that are mature and big enough to bloom. And we have an additional 40 or so seedlings from a successful pollination we had 3 years ago. Just a quick update on where we are today. This morning, this plant measured just over 91 inches. So over 7 feet tall, and this makeshift ruler I have here is no longer useful, which is a good problem to have. So the top of that ruler is 7 feet if you're watching on the live cam regularly, and it's shot past that, and it continues to grow. Even this morning, it's gotten bigger. So at this point, we've got the spade here starting to get some color on the inside of it, and I can't show you on camera, but there's a good kind of dark pink to purple color on the inside. And we know when it starts to color up like that a bloom is imminent. At this point, we're about 9 days since a 2-week estimate, so hopefully over the weekend and early into next week we should see this plant bloom. One of the early indicators that we were 2 weeks out was the emergence of the spadix, which is the centerpiece here, this structure. We also have a second plant coming into bloom, luckily, and this one, if I could show you the other side of the plant, that spadix just became visible today, so that plant there is about 2 weeks out from today. So,
And so you're saying the younger bloom is about 2 weeks old. How old is the plant itself, or both of these plants?
So, the bigger of the two, the bigger at this point, this plant is about 8 years old now, grown from seed. We had the seed donated to us from a gentleman in Hawaii in 2012. So 8 years old. This one, a little more interestingly, is a propagule. This was a pup that we removed from the tuber of another titanarum, and that one bloomed actually 3 years ago. So for those of you who saw that, we had 3 blooming at once, and one of them had a really dark, almost black colored spathe, and that was the parent of this plant. So this is a clone, and hopefully we'll see those similar characteristics. There's quite a unique bloom. So that one was removed in 2016 from the parent plant. So going on 4 years old now, but that plant overall is 8 years old. So same age as this one. They came from the same seed set, from the same parent, so they were siblings of each other, if you want to look at it that way.
And Stephen, about how much longer until our larger bloom is in full bloom?
Yeah, my guess right now, and I'm not an expert on this, but I'm guessing Sunday night will be a full bloom, and the bloom occurs usually over 36 to 48 hours. So I'm hoping, I'm expecting Sunday night will be the beginning, and it should go into Monday night. And of course, the flowers bloom in 2 stages. The flowers are down here at the bottom part of the spadix. Can't see them now, but we'll certainly share pictures at a later date when it is blooming. And Susan Powell on Monday will be able to tell you a lot about that from the botanist perspective. So,
and Stephen, can you help us understand, why does the bloom get so large? And is there a very large pollinator?
There is not a large pollinator that I'm aware of. Pollinators are carrion beetles or any other insect that is attracted to basically rotting flesh. Anything that is really stinky and rotting, insects attracted to that smell will pollinate this plant. So the insects will crawl down into the center of the spathe when the female flowers are in bloom, attracted to that stink, and they'll remain there through the second phase of the bloom when the male flowers release their pollen, and insects will get all coated in that and hopefully travel to another plant as cross-pollination is required.
And Stephen, describe for us the smell of a corpse flower.
Oh boy. If you imagine rotting fish with stinky socks, maybe just a dead rat on the sidewalk if you're from a city, you combine all those into one, and you might smell what this plant smells like. And you know, with good heat and humidity, this entire garden court ought to be filled with stink Sunday night, if I'm right about the big bloom.
Well, that sounds delicious. A lot of people in the chat are saying yum. And we've got some more questions here. So our first, another question from Sylvia is, how much approximately do these plants grow per day?
So the biggest measurement I've taken so far with this plant is 8 inches in a single day in 24 hours. That's not necessarily a rule. They could go quicker or slower than that. These plants tend to show a lot of individual characteristics. Sometimes they don't even get this big. So for this one in particular, 8 inches was the quickest day, and the last 2-3 days it started to slow down, and I think it was a 4-inch difference from yesterday, if I remember right. So still going pretty quick. If if you watch on the live stream, or if you're here throughout the day like I am, it's pretty amazing to come back every couple hours and see it just a little bit taller. They grow pretty quick.
And we've got a question from Sharon about the pollination. So they're assuming that they're not pollinated by carrion beetles in our collection. So how do we pollinate them in our collections?
So we call our, well, hopefully we have 3 blooms like we did 3 years ago, or we call our friends at other botanic gardens who are helping to conserve these plants. We were lucky enough to have some available this time around. We've had some pollen sent from Chicago, and we actually have pollen from 3 different plants that was stored in a freezer. And so when this plant blooms, on that first night when the female flowers are open, I will actually go in and cut 1 or 2 windows in the spathe with a knife, and I will use the baggie of pollen and a paintbrush, and I'll reach in there and individually pollinate each flower. And with 3 different sources, we'll have all sorts of genetic diversity and individuals to help increase genetic diversity in cultivation.
Wow. And we've got another question from John. So he says, I grow a plant called Amorphophallus konjac, which is also stinky and has a lovely flower. Are these related?
Yes.
And all these are these all arums?
Yes, they're directly related. They're in the same genus. They have the same growth habit. They've got all sorts of similarities, including the smell. So yes, directly related, and there's a little over 200 species known right now to science, and they're naming new ones all the time, so over 200 at a minimum. They come from Africa, Asia, and Australia, but limited to tropical zones pretty much. The konjac is one that we've learned has quite a range in terms of cultivation. You could grow that in most of the United States. It's good through zone 6 for those of you familiar with plant hardiness zones. It can basically take a pretty good freeze and it'll survive the winter.
Wow. And we've got another question from Annie. So how long does it take before the corpse flower returns to its quiet or dormant state?
Well, so we're going to pollinate this individual, and if we're successful, it'll produce fruit, and it could take up to 6 months for the fruit to develop so that we can collect them and grow the seeds. So we're looking at about 6 months from now. If the pollination failed, or if we didn't pollinate it, it'll senesce and collapse completely within about a month. Somewhere in there, and it'll be in a quiet state. I don't want to give you a time frame on that. They'll be in a quiet state until they're ready to grow a leaf, pretty much. I haven't seen any rule as far as that goes.
Well, related to that question, we've got a question from Rebecca. Do you find that outside environmental factors affect an inflorescence developing as opposed to a leaflet? Or are the plants all on their own timeline?
Well, so I've been growing this collection for only 2 years, and so this is only my second opportunity to really see a full cycle through, and it's actually a fun question for me because in cultivation, we would say absolutely the temperature would affect that. Typically, in most gardens, which are not in tropical regions, we'll only really see the blooms in the summer months when the heat and humidity are ample, and it's rare to see them bloom in the winter. But if you look at where they grow in the wild, and even some gardens that exist closer to the equator, you see much more sporadic blooms. So the short answer is yes, but you know, in our situation in a greenhouse, the greenhouse that these are kept in, we're able to keep the temperature and humidity up pretty much all year. We're a little bit limited in the winter by sunlight, but so if you're able to maintain good conditions, in theory, they should be able to bloom any time of year.
And related to the cultivation, Steve is wondering, what soil medium do you use, and is the corm ever taken out of the soil?
Oh, good one. So I just use a pretty much all-purpose soil medium. It contains coir, perlite, and pine bark. I couldn't give you the ratios off the top of my head, but bottom line is I don't mix up anything real particular for these. When they're actively growing, they dry down. They use a lot of water, and as long as you manage the water properly, this media has worked just fine for me. I've seen no reason to go to anything different for now. It's something to experiment with later, I guess. And then, do they ever come out of the soil? Absolutely. I try to take these out after each cycle. So if it grows a leaf and the leaf senesces, I cut it down. I'll try and remove it from that pot as quick as I can. I wash it off completely. I've got a big giant potato-looking tuber in my hand at that point, and I'll try and get it in fresh media. So they're kind of unique in that regard. You know, other plants, you can't quite repot them that often, or at least to that point where they're completely bare root. These you do have that opportunity. So every cycle you've got an opportunity to freshen up the media, get it back to that coarse level you want, and predictable water holding capacity. There's a good picture right there.
Yeah, there we go. That's the corm.
That picture right there is this same plant. Center of that tuber there, or the remnants of the previous leaf. I repotted this one pretty soon after the leaf had finished producing, and that was late June that I did that, and so almost 2 months later here we have an inflorescence.
And going back to the life cycle, Steve, when does the titanarum produce a leaf, and how long is it usually in that leaf stage?
The titanarum, when they're young, they'll produce leaves constantly. From seed, they'll produce multiple leaves, actually. And as they develop, they continue to produce a leaf. The seedlings that I have that are 3 years old have still not really gone to a dormant state. They continue to produce leaves, and at some point, they only produce one leaf at a time. And I'll say the 3-year-old plants are mostly producing one leaf by now. And then when they reach maturity, they'll produce a leaf, and that leaf could last anywhere from 6 months to a year to even longer than a year in some cases. And then senesce. And again, that period between stages, whether it produces another leaf or an inflorescence, is kind of, in my opinion, an unknown. It varies between the individual plants, and the conditions play a factor in that, it seems, as well.
Thanks, Steve. And we've got another question about the stink. So Sylvia's wondering, how far does the odor reach in this particular space, so in our conservatory?
Well, we'll have to see with this one in particular, but I remember 3 years ago when we had 3 plants in here. Fun fact, that was my first day of work at the Botanic Garden. Was the day that the second of the 3 was blooming. And you could smell it anywhere in the garden court, which is a 200-foot long room, I believe. And at any point in the garden court, you could smell it very strongly. And it will travel between rooms as the doors open and close. So it goes pretty far. And to add on to that, when these get ready to bloom, the spadix starts to heat up. And it's thought that that can help that stink travel farther. And in the wild, you'll often find these on hillsides. So the heat combined with the stink, combined with the hillside, I imagine that that'll travel quite a ways. And that would be ideal for this plant, given that the pollinators need to visit 2 plants that are blooming, which is infrequent. So you could imagine the chances of pollination actually occurring in the wild that adaptation is important for it to occur because they cannot pollinate them themselves, given that the flowers bloom on separate days.
Amazing. And we've got some more questions about cultivation. So Dennis is wondering, do we experience any disease problems with our titanarum collection?
Being that the plant is exotic to this area, it's a little easier on me in that regard. So some of the predators, disease-wise on this plant, don't exist in big numbers here. So the things I'll deal with are rot, especially of the tuber, especially during that dormant state. It's really important to control the moisture during that state. I haven't seen anything with the leaf itself, the inflorescence. I mean, these are pretty clean at this point, so that hasn't been the biggest challenge in that regard. And then the rot itself is actually not too bad in terms of control. There's some pretty simple things you can do to get that under control.
And we've got a question from Abigail who's wondering, given the rarity of wild blooming, do you think there's greater genetic diversity within cultivated populations?
There is, for sure, and that's something we're actually participating in. That's why we try to get pollen from other gardens. It gives us an opportunity to cross different genetic backgrounds. So, for example, 3 years ago when we pollinated our own 2 plants, they were separate individuals genetically, and so that resulted in 40 seedlings that are all genetic individuals. So the more we can do that, the more diversity we have in cultivation. And being that it's an endangered plant in Sumatra, we might have the opportunity to help repopulate the species if need be, given the diversity we're able to create in cultivation.
That is incredible. And we've got some more questions about cultivation. So some specific questions, maybe somebody's setting up their own titanarum growth chamber at home. But we're wondering, Steve is wondering, during active growth, how much water does the plant need? And are the moisture and light levels monitored? And does the plant need fertilizer in order to flower?
Wow, I'll try to remember all those.
Here, let's start with the first one. So how much water does this plant need during active growth? I assume that means when it's blooming.
Yeah, so when it's, if you grow plants in pots at home, there are many factors involved in that. The size of the pot, the health of the plant, the development of the roots. In this case, I have these tubers in pretty large pots. And so when I repotted this in June, gave it fresh media, I soaked it at that point, brought the soil up to saturation, and I have not watered it since then. The plant is producing a lot of roots at this point, but it's actually relying mostly on the tuber for its water and nutrients. So the only thing I've really done since it began to grow was just a syringe over the top, and that's only due to evaporation of water off the surface. I do mulch the top to try and control that to some extent, but there's still a little water loss over the surface. And it might sound weird that they wouldn't need any water, but again, I have it in a bigger pot, and even I question that sometimes, but to make sure, I have a moisture meter installed in this pot about halfway into the soil, and I'm able to monitor exactly how much water is in that pot, and it's moved by 1 percentage point since June. So when they produce a leaf, it's the opposite. They're and so much so that in this same size pot, they'll produce so many roots and use so much water that you'll actually see the media expand and contract with your watering. they'll just take all the water and the soil actually squeeze together. It's kind of fascinating to see. So it
Wow,
could almost be a daily watering for these.
that's incredible. That's a big difference. And
Yeah.
for the light level for this plant, is this inflorescence photosynthesizing? Does it need a lot of light?
It's photosynthesizing to some extent, but almost exclusively relies on the tuber itself. And if you were to weigh the tuber before and after blooming, you'll see a dramatic weight loss in the tuber, and that tells you that it's using all those carbohydrates that have already been produced as opposed to what it may be producing now. When you have the green color like that, pretty good bet that it is producing some carbs, but mostly relying on the tuber. The light levels, I'm not too particular with those when it's blooming. When they're producing a leaf, I'm very particular about those. And what I basically try to do is give them as much light as I can without allowing the leaf to overheat, basically. So that's kind of a game between temperature and humidity. So in the greenhouse, these are stored in. This time of year, there's pretty much a constant shade over the top. Sunlight will heat the leaf up of this plant pretty quickly. Being from Sumatra, the plant has almost no adaptation to dry air and direct sunlight. So it really relies on humidity to control water loss. And so there's a kind of a maximum I can go with the light level.
Yeah. An interesting question from John. Are there any known or theorized applications for any part of this plant, like chemicals or pharmaceutical, medicinal properties that we get from the titanarum?
Oh boy, that is a great Susan question.
You'll have to come back and join us on Monday.
I would ask Susan Pell that question. She would have none that I'm aware of. I know somebody asked about the konjac earlier. That is edible. Very common food source actually over in Asia. And I know people have eaten the tuber of this plant before, but it's an endangered plant. I've heard it doesn't taste good, so that's as far as I'll go with that.
I can't imagine eating a corpse flower, but I bet somebody's done it. So we've got a question from Eileen. That's an interesting question. Is there a difference between the terms tuber and corm? And can you tell us a little bit more about what a corm is?
Yes. Another good question to get a better answer from Susan. But that's a fun little debate for amongst botanists. I refer to this as a tuber because it can grow from multiple points, whereas a corm typically grows from one apex. So if I were to, for some reason, kill the apex of this plant and even cut it off, if I were to cut the top of the plant off, the plant has the ability to grow from all sorts of other points. And it seems to be the leaf chemically controls those growth points. So although you get the apex developed and you get the growth from one point constantly, you could eliminate that point and you'll get all sorts of other growth points. So I think that's the difference there. That's why I refer to it as a tuber. And again, that's even in-house, that's a fun conversation to have. And I learned that tuber is kind of in the tree of trying to describe underground stems. Tuber is kind of above corm, so they could be the same thing. In other words, a corm would be a type of tuber. So ask that one to Susan, because I bet she'll have her own answer.
We'll ask Susan when she's back, absolutely. But I mean, to me, underground stem definitely covers it. I am learning things as well during this. And Stephen, can we keep you for about 5 more minutes? I know we've kept you over 2:30. Is it okay if we keep you for about 5 more minutes of questions?
Absolutely.
Folks in the chat, this is our last opportunity to ask Stephen about how he grows and cultivates these flowers, or I should say inflorescence. So I'm going to go back and comb through the chat and see if there's anything I missed. But if you've got a burning question, absolutely put it in the chat. So we've got a question from...
I was just going to give you an idea of what the conditions are in here right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely, please do.
Close to 85 degrees in the room right now, and the humidity is up 60%, relative humidity. Those are pretty good conditions for this plant. Not so much for people, but that's what I try to produce for the plant, and it works out real well. That helps contribute to the size, which is still going.
And Stephen, what's our record for tallest corpse flower so far? Do you think we might?
I believe it's 99.5 inches. I believe is the number. 99 or 98.5. I'm hoping we beat that record. I'd love to get up there. There are records out there even beyond that I'd like to reach. I'd give you an idea. In the wild, these inflorescences will reach over 12 feet in some cases. So that's pretty spectacular. I'd love to figure out if that's possible in cultivation. So yeah, close to 100 inches is what we've seen here at the Botanic Garden.
Wow, that's incredible. And we're saying some folks would love to adopt one. That would be an interesting program, adopt a corpse flower. We do have a good question from Sharon, and she's wondering, is it common that we grow plants here at the U.S. Botanic Garden for the purposes of conservation?
Very common, in fact. That's one of the best things a Botanic Garden can do for the conservation mission is to preserve plants in that way, help increase the genetic diversity in cultivation. So when plants go extinct in the wild or reach near extinction, Botanic Gardens can preserve those individual plants and their characteristics, and in some cases, like this one, we could help repopulate it in the wild if the need arised. So we do have that as a big part of our mission here.
That is awesome. And do you know off the top of your head about how many Botanic Gardens grow the titanarum plant?
Well, if you asked that 10, 15 years, given that we've been able to propagate them so successfully, I'd say, and this is a guess, I think most Botanic Gardens have one at this point, or a good number of them do, and that's a good thing. People love to see them, and we're able to conserve them that way. And there might even be more in cultivation now, maybe even just in the U.S. than there are in the wild. So that's probably a good thing in terms of the population in the wild.
That is awesome. And you might have said this, Stephen, but when this plant blooms, are we going to be sending our pollen or any of the genetic material from this plant to any other Botanic Gardens?
Yes, we've been in communication with a couple actually. There are a number of Botanic Gardens with these in bloom this summer. So yes, we're going to preserve it, and we're going to be happy to share it with other gardens to help pollinate their plants. And even if that opportunity weren't out there, we would preserve the pollen and probably send it to be frozen and kept for a later date. So yes, we'll save it either way, but we'll probably share it in this case because of the number of blooms that are out there.
Awesome. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you so much to our arborist, Stephen Jones. You've been a font of corpse flower information, and I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Your questions were fantastic, and we've got some more corpse flower programs coming up. As Stephen said, the predicted bloom night sounds like Sunday night. So by Labor Day morning, you might be able to join Susan Pell, who will be here on Monday morning to also answer some questions. And if you want to check in on Saturday, we're going to have our horticulture manager, Jim Adams, doing another program on Saturday. So I just want to say thank you again to Stephen Jones, and thank you to everyone who participated today.